Hi, it's Dr. Jenn Kennedy. I'm a sexologist and couples therapist. The Pleasure Project is about sex and relationships. That includes desire, dysfunction, dissatisfaction, exploration, toys, and trends. Sometimes I'll enlist other experts. Sometimes it'll just be me. We'll increase your insight and enhance your pleasure. So tune in. Today, we're diving into a topic that's reshaping how a whole generation approaches love, intimacy, and self-worth, anxiety, and connection in young adulthood. My guest is Dr. Shreya Hessler, clinical psychologist, speaker, and founder of the Mindset Center in Maryland. She works with Gen Z and young adults to navigate anxiety, perfectionism, and the messy, beautiful process of becoming themselves. Her TEDx talk, Stumble Stories, What Success Can't Teach Us, explores how embracing imperfection can deepen connection. And that's exactly what we're unpacking today. From rejection sensitivity to shifting social norms, we'll explore how anxiety is shaping emotional and sexual relationships for young people and what it takes to build real intimacy in an anxious world. So join us. Welcome back to Pleasure Project. Today, we are diving into a topic that's shaping how an entire generation approaches love and intimacy and self-worth, anxiety and connection in young adulthood. Joining me today is Shreya Hessler, a clinical psychologist and speaker who helps Gen Z and young adults navigate anxiety, perfectionism, and the messy process of becoming themselves. As the founder of Mindset Center in Maryland, she guides clients in building confidence, authenticity, and emotional resilience in both their personal and professional lives. We'll unpack how anxiety, rejection sensitivity, and a shifting sense of connection are shaping the way young people relate, both emotionally and sexually, and what it takes to build healthy, real intimacy in an anxious world. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I haven't actually done a whole lot of coverage of this population. I tend to kind of shift to the older crowd.
Yeah.
So when I met you and we kind of talked about the young adults, I was like, yeah, I think they need some attention. Let's kind of like see what's going on with this generation. And so I appreciate you being here and giving me some insight. So
I'm happy to be
yeah.
here. This is a population I love to work with. And I'm kind of known as a pediatric psychologist early on in my career. But after being in this profession for 20 years, I've grown with them. And so because I specialize in seeing anxious patients and I used to just see anxious kids, they've grown up. And now
Mm-hmm.
they are in college and in, the early stages of their careers.
Mm-hmm.
They're having a tough time. So it's interesting to be kind of growing and evolving with them. In my
Mm-hmm.
clinic, work with them, and they're back talking about things that in a different
Yeah.
context, but kind of the same process from when they were younger.
Yeah. It's like you've seen them sort of go through some developmental stages and now they're trying to adult in a challenging space. What do you see kind of among the Gen Z and young adults being kind of key, like chief challenges as they're trying to kind of grow into kind of early professional life?
So, there's been a lot of talk about the anxious generation, right? Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of work on.
Well, first of all, let's define, because as I was telling people we were going to have this conversation,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they were like, "Wait, who's Gen Z? What is?" They don't even
I
let's
know.
define Gen Z.
Raised,
They're like, "Well, who are we?" I'm like, "I'm Gen X." They're like,
huh?
"Who's Gen Z?"
I'm
They
Gen
don't
X.
even know.
Right? So,
Okay.
obviously a generation is about 25 years. So we're still
Mhm.
in, like the Gen Z era. In fact, the youngest member of Gen Z is a freshman in high school right now. Gen
Okay.
Alpha is eighth grade and younger. And Gen Z is, like I said, ninth grade. And now, full into their early 20s, right? And their 20s. So these are folks that are basically, if you think about it, 14 and the prime of like the burgeoning part of adolescence, like the hormonal, like, explosions that happen. And then we're navigating all through high school into college, beyond college, and in the early years of their careers, right?
Mhm.
The anxious generation is defined, to quote Jonathan Haidt, who I just mentioned before, who wrote the book, The Anxious Generation, is this is a generation that has been overprotected in the real world, and I'm paraphrasing here, and underprotected in the digital world. And so what that ends up resulting in is an increase in anxiety. And what I'm witnessing, not just in my clinical practice, but also as a college professor at the undergraduate level right now, really having this sense of disconnection, the things that organically
Mhm.
you and I had opportunity to kind of fumble and figure out because we were able to play on the playground. We're the play generation. We
Mhm.
were able to play on the playground, scruff our knees, make mistakes quietly,
Mhm.
and figure things out. This generation feels like they're under a magnifying glass. And whether that's
Mhm.
projected or whether that's just comparison culture, it's a different world they're living in right now.
Mhm.
And so if you've grown up anxious and overprotected, it makes it really hard to take chances appropriately,
Mhm.
right? To explore and above all else, connect, let alone be intimate with someone else. And so I'm finding that that hesitancy they may have had as an late childhood, early adolescent, again, the content is different. Thinking about or worried about is different. Process seems to be the same. It's just a different subject matter. And they've grown up under this kind of magnifying glass, like I said before, that
Mhm. Yeah.
makes them feel like they're just being watched and judged all the time, which makes exploration
So
really hard.
is it like that magnifying glass was external and now they've internalized it?
That's it. So to think about it, the digital era, really at social media and its and I talk a lot about social media because this is how they're connecting with each other, right? This is kind of how
Mhm.
they're communicating with each other. And I started noticing this about a decade ago because I was in session, maybe actually less than a decade ago, really mostly 5 years ago, where these young adults and late adolescent patients were talking to me about having conversations with their significant other. And in
Mhm.
diving deeper, I started to realize they actually weren't talking to each other, they were texting each other. And
Mhm.
so, in your podcast and in your work, you talk about, touch and touch starvation. I know that's been talked about, but they've been set up to have what they call intimate relationships and having deep discussions about a variety of subjects, but without speaking words to each other. So
Mhm.
that part then creates this notion of
Mhm.
underlying anxiety about like perception of tone and what do they mean by that. Then you add in all the other
Yeah.
things, slang and emojis and things like that. Things get lost in translation.
Yeah.
And that catches up with you, when you're trying to connect and partner with someone.
And they're intuiting what this means when they see things posted or Snapchat and they don't have full context
That's right.
and underdeveloped brains and right there's just
Right.
the
Right.
the layers of when I think about growing up in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s and right you had to wait, right? You're just on that coiled phone like waiting and like maybe
Yeah.
talking to your friend, but you had to wait until Monday morning to get the information. You didn't have like this flood of like Snapchats and Instagram posts to like feed your like anxiety.
Well, and not only feed your anxiety, but feed what the definition is of worth and
Mhm.
popularity, connection. So it's not,
Mhm.
I talk about this generation really having difficulty with the pause button. Things have to be
Yes.
automatic, there's urgency, and there's a push to get it right. Right.
Mhm.
So, this is a generation that whose parents had a difficult time. Let me just correct this, whose parents had a difficult time when their children were feeling uncomfortable, be it a poor grade on an exam in school or
Yeah.
perception of how they were being treated socially, right? And so there becomes this lack of opportunity, right? To have that pause button to be like, oh, I wonder what that's about. And you kind of don't have, for you and I, we waited till Monday morning and it may not have been a big deal, or people weren't talking about things in the moment. Now, on a Friday night, you get to see what everybody else is doing and
Mhm.
who they're with and how they're with them and
Mhm.
how those pictures are curated, etc. And it creates this curated platform of like, this is what it's
Mhm.
supposed to be like. This is what love is supposed to look like. This is what a relationship is supposed to look. And
Right.
I think that burdens them, right? And prevents them from taking, I think, natural chances in relationship building that you and I had the ability to do pretty naturally, right?
Yeah, so the overthinking, the avoidance then that deepens the anxiety, right? And you said perfection.
Yeah,
Did you
perfect.
see a lot of perfectionism in
So
this?
much, so much. So the idea
Mhm.
of wearing it right, looking right, doing it right, the judgment of
Mhm.
the rules of like how to engage. Do you communicate first? Do you not
Mhm.
second guessing that overthinking piece
Mhm.
gets in the way of the actual execution, right? Of whether or not you want to have a conversation with a potential partner or somebody you're interested. And then like so that's just the beginning part, right? Forget about the sexual intimacy piece for a second and just talk about the ability to make eye contact,
Yeah.
connect, right? And it's starting to just catch up, right? So this is a generation who's like partnering later,
Mhm.
marrying, and certainly marrying later.
Well, there's the lack of practice, right?
Yes.
They don't have the practice, and then there's like the and then magnify all the pressure that they have to get it right,
You
right?
have to get
And
it.
all the skills are coming later and with less, yeah. Oh,
Well, and
it's
also think about,
challenging.
right? Like I ha it's interesting because like my youngest patient is in elementary school and my oldest
Mhm.
patient is in her 70s, right? And so I just have this unique
Mhm.
and I've also done this for 20 years. So like I've just seen this evolution, right? And you know, we know, you and I know that when you're anxious, we do two things. We avoid the things that make us uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do
Mhm.
and we do reassurance seeking, right? Like, and
Mhm.
so oftentimes our reassurance seeking isn't you and I might have asked a trusted adult, a parent, etc. They're looking online for the reassurance of like, is this
Yeah.
neurotypical? Is this normal? Is this expected? And based
They're
on what
asking chat.
and chat, they're asking AI. They're
They're asking chat, which isn't
the
even a
bots don't
person.
have body parts. I say this all the time. The bots don't have body parts, right? Like, so, that part makes the intensity, the frequency of the overthinking and the duration of how much they're perseverating on getting it right, so much so much more than we ever felt before. And so then it just everybody feels awkward. Nobody wants to touch anybody, no one wants to like do anything because they're so
Mhm.
afraid of getting it wrong.
Well, and so also, I guess I've heard that more and more these younger people, these younger people, because I see the older people, these younger people are tending to like hang out in groups that they're not doing the traditional, like, let's go on a date. Is
Yeah,
that what you're seeing? Like that they're hanging out and it's vague. And so the status of what they are isn't taking shape. And so it's like they're not getting
yeah,
those skill building or,
exactly. And, the murky water of the situationship is
Mhm.
thing. So I learn a lot about these terms as I'm a practitioner, right? And the operational definition kind of changes over time. But a situationship is not a commitment. It's
Mhm.
a term commitment, right? And I do see on the flip end, members of this generation just giving themselves some grace and some time to say, okay, maybe I don't know and
Mhm.
figure this out, but the amount of anxiety that I am witnessing just kind of translate into the worlds of college, which is where a lot of sexual exploration tends to happen, right?
Yeah.
And the young working world. So like think about remote working, isolation. There's just a lot more isolation. So then
Mhm.
don't have opportunities. So you were talking about practice response. Like there's no opportunity for that practice response organically just because culturally, especially since COVID, we tend to be more isolated and we haven't had those practice skills and it's a little
Yeah.
bit slow to catch up. And this is happening for a generation of kids, where their brains were still actively developing, but their worlds were getting smaller and smaller, right? And so that's just kind of what I'm witnessing right now in my work.
So, and also the piece of connection. I mean, connection is so important for every age. But
Yeah.
you know, certainly COVID was a huge global problem, but then everybody moving to independent work and remote work, a lot of that is reversed, but the challenges of connection. And as these young adults move into college, I just saw a young adult this week, and he's moved here for college. He doesn't know anybody. He doesn't want to be in a fraternity. And I hear this in general, I hear it with men a lot,
Yeah.
is that once they get out of the structure of school where they don't have teams or they don't have classes, they don't know how to meet anybody. Women seem to do it better, but
Yeah.
the young adults, once they start working, or if they're not in a working situation where they're naturally meeting people, they don't know how to make any friends and they feel really lonely.
It's really like, I'm really glad you mentioned this because also as a practitioner, I think a handful of
Mhm.
kids this week, or young adults, excuse me, that I saw this week, and across all genders, lonely. And it is, even if we are recommending certain steps, and I call that microdosing,
Mhm.
because sometimes it feels so overwhelming to tell our clients, like, well, just go join a club, right? Instead, like, can you scaffold for them? That's actually
Mhm.
what I'm finding, is that the social skills that are required to have
Mhm.
more intense relationships that we all as human beings want, we require, I think, more scaffolding provisions
Mhm.
for our young adults right now, for, within a higher ed and then beyond, right? And so it's not easy to ask someone to initiate when they don't know how to, and they've never
Mhm.
really had opportunity to. So what I call microdosing is really about, can you eat lunch outside in the
Mhm.
park? Can
Mhm.
you say hi to 5 people, random strangers, as you're crossing campus? And you and I are talking about
Mhm.
college students, for example. But that connection piece of practice response and eye contact,
Yeah.
shaking hands, like simple things that you and I don't ever think about. Really hard, really,
Yeah.
really hard to do. And especially if they've got a phone in their hand, right? So
Yeah.
you're looking down, right? Um, and so
But
connection,
it breaks through that barrier that they've created of like that and me. So at least even just doing that piece, because also the loneliness deepens as they hunger for intimate connection, right? So many of the times they're like, "Oh, I want a partner," and it's like if they can't make a friend, they can't even imagine how they're going to find an intimate partner.
that's it. And group activities are always safer, but putting your foot forward to at least go into an environment with a group of people can be also pretty daunting,
Hmm.
right? Especially
Hmm.
as you're making other types of transitions. And so this later part of Gen Z, they're transitioning into higher ed, out of higher ed, into graduate school
Hmm.
work or whatever have you. It's hard because they don't know how to play with each other.
Hmm.
Simply,
Or they've sort of done this flattening where it's like everybody's just kind of friends, and it's like you don't want to take the risk and say I'm interested in you, or can we peel off of the group and see if we can explore this in a deeper way, right? That's an emotional risk that
right,
they're not used to taking, and they don't know how to find that language and be vulnerable. And so it's like, let's all just continue to sort of have this, you know safe enough thing.
right. But that's the problem, right? Safe enough contributes to
Mhm.
isolation, right? As opposed to, why not? Right? Like, try. What's the worst that can happen? You didn't
But
like
that okay, but I guess what I find a little confusing is at the same time, this is also the generation that is doing all this stuff on Instagram, right? They're taking huge risks with with being more exposed and more outrageous on social media and you know, being more eye-catching and that type of thing.
it's fascinating that you say that, because right now I'm teaching, ironically, a digital detox class. So we've been talking about social media this whole conversation. I'm teaching an
Mhm.
undergraduate a digital detox class. So the class is completely analog, right? And right now, when we're recording, it's halfway through the semester, and you know I just had a lecture about digital identity versus real identity, and
Mm.
so on TikTok, on Snap, or maybe less so a Snap, but on TikTok and on Instagram, etc. There are these personas that
Mhm.
are put on screen, I think for a myriad of reasons. But it was
Mhm.
fascinating that my students would say, like, but that's not all of who I am. Not everybody gets to see everything that I am. But if we think
Mhm.
about if everybody is putting a curated, altered persona on social media, there's a groupthink that happens, right? That everybody thinks like this is the way it's supposed to be, or this is how everybody is. And then in real life, it makes it much harder to be authentic, right? And because
Yeah.
you've got this role that you've created for yourself online digitally. And I think that just makes it so much harder. So in this class, Jen, the simplest things, talking to each other, small group exercises, eye contact,
Mhm.
don't give them a choice. It's almost
Yeah.
exposure therapy. And as a behaviorist,
Yeah.
I do all the time, right? Like your phone, like everything is off. They have a notebook and a journal and a pen in my class.
Yeah.
Midway through the semester, now they don't miss their devices and they're talking out loud about how they wished they've had more opportunities like this class
Mhm.
offline to connect, to form relationships and even friendships that I've seen kind of blossom over the last couple of months. It's been extraordinary to see. And it also makes me sad because
Yeah.
it shouldn't be sensational. It shouldn't be the exception to the rule. It should be how we're communicating because that's
But
what it
you're giving them it's almost like when you go to a retreat and then you're like, "Oh god, I wish I could feel like this all the time." Or you're giving them some opportunity to experience what it could be like and some when I leave a retreat, I'm always like, "I should do this all the time." And I sort of have some lingering like weeks of it and then I click back into my normal life, right? And then I forget. I have amnesia. But it's like if you can pull some of that in, and start to help them see that that's even available.
yeah. And also if you're feeling super anxious, right? You're you're focused so much on the overthinking, like that one emotion, right? That you don't give any attention to the possibility of other emotions and also the idea that it's okay
Mhm.
to not be okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. Discomfort tolerance is super, super hard for those experiencing significant anxiety, right? And so the more we squish it away and we try to automatize our feelings on devices like social media, we fail to see what makes us human and that we're supposed to experiment and flounder and figure it out
Mhm.
as we grow. And it's not something to be ashamed of. Right. And so I'm just seeing this translation from performance based anxiety go from grades and job performance and online engagement to self worth with respect to kind of how they are connected with other human beings.
Yeah. Also then too is how does this sort of anxiety and confusion around self like impact desire, the relationship to pleasure? Like how does that factor in?
Yeah, and it's interesting because on one hand, I think this generation just has more information to be able to see intimacy and sex in so many different ways that have in previous generations been shamed or
Mhm.
quieted. But the hesitancy is palpable. It's tremendous,
Mhm.
right? So I see this kind of like flip back and forth. Like we can talk about it, but we may not engage in it. And I think
Little
that's
that which is a little bit counterintuitive. Like you'd
right.
think if they have all the info like they've seen porn, they've got porn access since they were 10,
Yeah.
which nobody had before, right? We had paper magazines, but they've got
Right.
video, but yet, right, they've
Well,
got so
and I
much
think
hesitancy.
I'm so glad you said something like that because, I've seen patients of that age who have impulse challenges and, developmentally they're curious, right? Like that's
Mhm.
it. But then they see something they can't unsee.
Mhm.
So that's also what perpetuates the anxiety, that exposure is this what I'm supposed to do? And you're 9 or 10 years old and
Mhm.
you might have seen something and it's not pictures, it's live action of things.
Mhm.
It can't not affect your mental operational definition of what you're supposed to do as an adult. It doesn't leave your brain, right? And that's the thing that concerns me that almost then the idea of intimacy and exploration comes with that shame or that reminder of like, I'm not supposed to do this because when I first discovered it,
Mm.
wasn't supposed to see it in the first place,
Mhm.
right? So it's a lot of confusion. I mean, I know parents are having such a hard time because they cannot gatekeep all of that
Yeah.
information and decide when it's right for their child or their family to be able to share information. And so then we're doing like, trying to plug up a fire hose, right?
Right.
So developmentally, I think it's a challenge because even as young adults, these young adults have seen more and
Yeah.
seen more live action, I would say,
Mhm.
versus Playboy magazine, for example, or Playgirl magazine, than any other previous generation. And that's
Right.
hard to unpack,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Well, I know too that just in terms of expectations of how far things can go and what is a normal relational expectation in terms of sexuality, like there's been, I saw statistics on girls expecting to have like anal sex sooner, that
Yep.
type of thing, which is unfortunate because that is absolutely not an expectation. But because it's been displayed in this forum, unfortunately, that happens. And again, they're not developmentally ready because they're not talking about it. They're not negotiating it. But, because it's been displayed in porn or in these, areas, it gets sort of communicated that that's the expectation,
Right.
especially because they're trying to avoid penetrative sex. And so it gets communicated that these other types of sex are a workaround, which is
Yeah.
absurd.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's all this pressure that happens. And there, and my understanding is that, again, there isn't enough communication, or there isn't, and the anxiety probably exacerbates it. So there isn't a lot of discussion or focus on pleasure. There is more about having the action, but not really, the pleasure isn't really focused,
Yeah.
you
Or
know?
the ability to just hit a pause button and say, can we enjoy this? Right?
Yeah.
It's more transactional,
Yes.
fear based
Yeah.
versus part of the human condition, right? So going
Mhm.
back to earlier in our conversation, if we have, difficulty having a conversation like you and I are having right now, albeit, digitally, we can still make eye contact, etc. Having real intense conversations with friends, like so platonic relationships
Yeah.
and the relationships, they're breaking up with their significant others via text.
Mhm.
Normative.
Yeah.
So if the buildup is normative, if the platonic buildup is normative
Yeah.
within a context, then how are they going to have an eye to eye conversation about what feels good for them and what doesn't, and what feels good for their partner? So there's a lot of scaffolding, I think, that has to be done. And I think we should be talking about it more because then the expectations, when there's silence, there's anxious expectations, which are
Yeah.
off. And so we have to fill that silence with dialogue and talking about it and give them safety to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Because, and also, like, if connection is learned, like, how do we help the young adults unlearn performative patterns kind of and reconnect with genuine intimacy?
That's a
You
great
know?
question, right? And I've been thinking about that a lot over these last couple of months, just in terms of what I've seen on college, on the college campus I'm on, and within my client caseload. It starts by just those of us who know in our profession, like talking about it, right? And saying like, you
Yeah.
should try this. Like this actually could feel really great. Now, again, my class experiment is just natural. Like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
that's actually
Yeah. Yes.
huge discovery, right? But that practiced response. So I think we owe it, work organizations and companies, et cetera, especially those who are hiring, Gen Z now, right? Create spaces for connection and community. Don't have this automaticity that they
Mhm.
have those skills in abundance, right? If we know that they haven't had as much access or they've been conditioned to learn, in a one-dimensional way, we have to create that on college
Yeah,
campuses.
give them a different. Yep. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. A quick pause here to share something that I've been working on that I think you will really appreciate, especially if you've ever felt confused or disconnected from your sexual desire. It's a self-paced course that I created for women who want a better understanding of their sexual desire, especially if it's felt confusing, inconsistent, or hard to access. A lot of us are taught that desire should just be there, effortless, spontaneous, always on. But that is not the reality for most people. And when it's not, it can leave you feeling frustrated or like something is wrong with you. If you've ever felt turned on one day and completely disconnected the next, or if you've struggled to say what you really want sexually, if you're both excited by the idea of vibrant sex and hesitant about what that even looks like, this course is for you. Desire is complex. It lives in your brain just as much as your body. And in this course, I guide you through the understanding of your unique relationship to it without pressure, shame, or performance. You'll get short videos and guided worksheets to help you map out your personal erotic template, identify what turns you on and off and what shuts you down, understand the blocks that might be getting in your way, reconnect with your body, and you'll explore your sexual self with more confidence and curiosity. You can go at your own pace. You don't need to want more sex. You just need to want to know yourself better. So if this resonates, then head on over to pleasureproject.us and learn more and enroll in the course. Now back to the episode. Welcome back. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about something I think affects this population, which is rejection sensitivity. So let's look at that kind of that heightened emotional response to perceived rejection or criticism.
Yeah, and it's perceived as the right word, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, that's where the anxiety piece is up, avoidance comes up, where we don't like getting feedback, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
perceive that all feedback is negative and shameful versus constructive or just kind of neutral feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you
That
add that,
is that the that's part of the perfectionism.
yeah, it is. It's either you're doing it all right or you're a failure.
Mm-hmm.
There's no
Mm-hmm.
gray area, right? Black or white thinking. And so, you know, there's this hesitancy that exists amongst this population of being vulnerable, showing like their true selves for fear of rejection or for fear
Mm-hmm.
of judgment. And the argument they give me back is that we kind of have been conditioned for
Mm-hmm.
perfectionism across the board in our existence. So it's not just in our social relationships. It's anything that we have to demonstrate performatively that we are worthy of being highlighted or elevated or given an accolade for. And it just has trickled down into relationship building. So some of my patients have talked about the loneliness as much as they don't want to feel that way, feel safer than taking a chance and asking to be a part of a crowd and being rejected. And so if they don't have absolute reassurance that they'll be accepted, the feedback will be positive, the chance is not.
Mm-hmm. God, because I'm just thinking about that in terms of intimacy and how tricky it is with intimacy. I mean, rejection is part of intimacy, right? Like there's going to be times when your partner isn't in the mood or they don't like what you've initiated, right? They don't like the way you kiss, they don't like the way you initiated touch, whatever. Like rejection is part of intimacy. And
Yeah,
so that is such a difficult dynamic to absorb. And so it's just rife with rejection
yeah, yeah, and so think
possibility.
about it, like we just talked about, like, if we're having trouble having communications about platonic things, then
Mm-hmm.
can you imagine what it must be like for them? And so, we in my office, less about the sexual intimacy piece, but really just even public displays of affection, right? Like
Yeah.
holding hands and exchanging kisses in public and things like that. I think that oftentimes some of the feedback I get is that I don't really want anyone to see us. I don't want anyone to judge
Mhm.
us.
Uh-huh.
That's fascinating to me. And I think they're hesitant to do it in private so they wouldn't do it in public, in terms of exchanging,
Is that true though? Because is it the public being in public adds that layer of judgment versus if you're in private, you can do it without being judged?
without being
Or is
judged.
it
But
yeah,
if you're
yeah.
having trouble communicating what you like, what you
Mhm.
don't like, uh,
Mhm.
that in private, right?
Mhm.
Then you're going to be more distant in public.
Yeah.
And that, that impacts how I think others also see what a intimate relationship looks like on
Mhm.
a grander scale, right? So there's the relationship you have, within
Yeah.
your four walls, but then how you display it outside. And then I think sometimes that muddies the water a little bit, right? The translation between the
Well,
relationship.
and to your point of like the scaffolding skills, I mean, being able to, I find this even with adults. I mean, I work with older adults, and it's like they often don't have the skill building to negotiate their needs in an erotic space and say, I would rather have it be this way, or I need something different, in
Right.
terms of touch or how we engage in this. It's like they've never done it that way. They don't know how to find their words. And so I can't imagine, if these young adults have never had that modeled for them or they've never had that type of exchange in their friendships, they don't know how to do it. There might be a tendency towards people pleasing, and they don't know. I mean, that translates to if they're doing that in their interpersonal relationships, that's going to translate to erotically. I see this with young girls a lot.
Yeah.
They're just like they want to be liked or they want to be chosen or they want to be, you know, and so it gets tricky when they try to start having sex.
And also advocating and having agency for what they want, right?
Mhm.
Thinking if it's people pleasing, then it's about what somebody else wants, not so much
Yeah.
about what they want too. And in a relationship, there has to be reciprocity, right? For it to
Mhm.
be healthy, and you have to have that communication. So when I talk with my patients about my young adult patients about this anxiety piece, I'm really trying to scaffold. Can we start with dialogue?
Mhm.
The dating, courting era, etcetera, you know and they do date. I think they're just more discerning because they feel like they have sometimes they feel
Do you
like they
feel like this swipe culture though is like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no,
yeah,
and they can't
100%. It's
versus
fine.
like
Mhm.
let
Yeah,
me sit in like the maybe or let me. Because, yeah, I feel like
yeah,
their brains don't entertain. I mean, when you've only got 3 people to choose from, it's very different and discerning than when you think you've
yeah,
got 300 people to choose from, you
that's
know?
exactly right, yeah, and then, your initial conversations are generally over text,
Mm.
right? And so then you're looking I mean, there's all these nuances, right? How quickly they're responding.
Mhm,
How long before, that they go unread. There's all these subtle messages in this communication dance that, again, they're perceiving with significant rejection sensitivity. And
mhm.
so, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, what I do is challenge those negative beliefs, right? We know anxiety
What else
works.
could be true?
What else could be true? Like, maybe he was taking out the garbage, or maybe he was cooking dinner, or whatever have you. And so challenging those negative thoughts, paying attention to the anxiety arousal that comes,
Mhm,
when we feel anxious, right? And saying, okay, just because I feel anxious somatically, right? My stomach hurts, my heart's beating really fast, doesn't mean I have to act on it in the moment. Can I reframe
mhm,
and step away and come back, right? And can I not engage in reassurance seeking? Right? Like
mhm,
constant communication of are we okay? Is everything good? Etc. Right? Which generally tends to backfire anyway. Asking yourself what those feelings are, right? Like, I'm really feeling anxious about this. It's just a guy I'm having a conversation with, right? And someone I haven't even had lunch with. And you're balancing all of those skills with, I think, this strong desire among so many of them of I want a person, right? I want to have
mhm.
right? And that longing, that's evolutionary, right? That's what makes us
Yeah,
human. And so that's a really hard thing for us to straddle when we don't have those life skills and we don't
yeah.
have the practice response.
Well, and
Fascinating.
it's like learning that grounding and connection. Once, like you're trying as a psychologist to help them, gosh, have some of those basic skills of self-regulation
Yeah.
and resilience, right? Because basically they need to know that they're okay, regardless of whether this date works out, regardless of whether this sexual experience works out, whether,
Yeah.
right? Whatever. Like they're going to be okay on the other side of this. That
Yeah.
self knowledge and
Yeah. It's a lesson, right?
mhm,
It's not
mhm.
something we should be ashamed of. It's like, here's some data in
Yep.
my head. I hate to sound like a scientist in that perspective, right? It's like it's data and it's information. So I liked this.
Yeah.
I did this. I like this about this person, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
and then build on that, right?
It's so hard to see. I mean, you've also raised kids, right? You see that like these small moments feel like such big moments. It feels like it's like the end of the world. And we've all been there too, but it's
Right.
not, right? It's not the end of the world,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
And I also think, like, listen, as somebody who sees kids and has been a parent, and like I said, I don't know if I said this, but all three of my kids constitute, Gen X, so Gen Z rather. The overprotection piece of like you're not supposed to suffer. It's a real thing the parents have
mm-hmm,
conditioned to say it's not okay for you to feel
mm-hmm.
any kind of discomfort. So how does then that translate into creating a healthy relationship, right? That I'm
Right.
not
They have
supposed to
to,
feel comfortable. I have to like it right
they're,
away and work right away.
yeah. So they don't have an expectation, right? Because part of it is your expectation of a situation. I remember hearing a study like, right, part of it is how I think they were talking about a commute or something. It's like if you expect your commute to be an hour or you expect your commute to be 20 minutes and it's an hour, you're agitated. If you knew it was going to be an hour, then you're ready for it. So in a relationship, if you think it's going to involve some difficulty, some struggle, then you're ready for it. But if you think everything's supposed to be easy all the time,
Right.
then you have no frame or no context for struggle.
That maybe you meet somebody, you go out with them, etc., and you don't feel the vibe right away.
Mhm.
And shutting it down, you give it another shot. So it's the expectation of like, it's going to take a minute maybe for me to see if this is going to work. It may not be fireworks immediately, right? And I do think that's a conditioned response based on like social media, etc.,
Mhm.
that it's supposed to be like explosive from the first second. And then if it's not,
Mhm.
you kind of crossed a bunch of people off the list, right? And
Yeah.
that's hard to swallow too.
Yeah. Which also you're probably both on a little bit of good behavior and holding back your cards, right?
Yeah,
But there's a whole bunch of variables that factor into long-term compatibility. So
that's
that's
it.
the other tricky part.
Right. Supposed to be fast and magic, right? Like, you know, that part of our human condition has not changed, right?
Yeah.
The expectation, I think, has. And so I think that we don't talk about that enough. We talk a lot about
Mhm.
perfectionism and
Mhm.
performance and achievement in much more concrete, tangible ways, like academics, etc. But we don't talk about it in the muddy areas, which is relationship building, and certainly not in intimate relationship building.
Mhm.
And I'm just watching, like I said, from this evolution of like I saw them as younger kids and then they're grown-ups, they're adulting now. And it's so hard. It's really hard for them.
Well, and also I think that anxiety is part of the human condition, right? We're
Yeah.
going to it's going to be present and certainly as relationships start to unfold, anxiety is a normal part of that. You're going to feel that flutter and that is going to be part of that. So we can't fix it. And if anything, I would say curiosity.
That's
I
it.
remember, my gosh, I had this wonderful therapist years ago and she said to me, try to go towards curiosity as
Mhm.
a way. And I thought that was so useful,
Yeah.
right? When I get curious, that is a way to channel anxiety that is really functional because that helps me kind of stay in a more productive place.
I'll teach my
So,
patients about like related to that and related to grounding that you talked about earlier of, you know, from meditation, noting, right? Like so a thought comes in
mhm,
you, a what if I can't, I should. And instead of being like, oh, that's I'm not allowed to feel that way. I'm not allowed to think that way, or this must mean something. Can you just note, that's a thought. What am I gonna do?
mhm.
'Cause that allows you the ability to be curious, right? To kind of lean into that curiosity that you're talking about. And it's interesting, the more I can talk to patients about process versus content, like, that's a thought.
Mhm,
I wonder how that's serving me. It's not, can I move forward? They tend to get less lost in the weeds and they feel more empowered, right? And that's where curiosity created, right? Because then there's an opportunity to kind of think about it like, that's interesting. Why did I think that way? As opposed to it being so intense.
So I know you just did a TEDx talk. What was the topic?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I just did a TEDx, and it's basically this idea that stumble stories or failure teach us what success can't. So we had this whole conversation today about experimentation and connection and curiosity. And that is what comes from recognizing, amplifying our stumble stories. So where we had our own setbacks and having more
Hmm.
conversations about that so that we normalize that growth and curiosity and true achievement come from where we screwed up a lot. Right. So I'm
Yeah.
excited. I'm really excited to share it with the world.
Good. I love that. And you're showing by example, right? That when you stumble, actually that's a growth
Yeah,
opportunity.
that's right.
So
It's a
I love
lesson,
it.
not a failure
Hmm.
lesson.
Hmm.
Right. So,
It's
yeah,
great.
I'm excited. I think it's an every person story, and I'm excited to share it with them.
Great. Well, we will link that in the show notes. So you can find Shreya at Dr. Shreya Hessler on Instagram. And thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks, Jen, for having me.
Hey, it's Dr. Jen. Thanks for tuning in. If something in today's episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review and drop a comment. We'd love your feedback. It really helps support the podcast and keeps this content coming your way. If you're looking to dive deeper into pleasure, connection, and self discovery, check out my Pleasure Circle course, where we explore these topics in a fun, guided way. I also write a weekly newsletter with articles, insights, and inspiration to help you live a more connect pleasure filled life. And if you want to connect with me directly, you can message me on Instagram at Dr. Jenn Kennedy or email me at drjenkennedy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.